So I wanted to come on and do a video about some of these athletic director searches. And before I do, I want to say thank you for everyone that's been watching and listening to Higher Ed Athletics interviews, both the athletic directors and the deputies, having the best viewership and listenership I've had ever on this show in 6, almost 7 years. And I appreciate everyone taking the time to listen and watch it. If you can just share it with your industry colleagues, all your friends, and let's just keep showing appreciation of those sponsors that are making this show possible, and including AD Vantage, where Victory is vetted. A lot of new partnerships coming out of them with other schools, but what I wanted to say is these insight videos, starting with this one, I'm now using the data from AD Vantage, from their own portal, that I can add to my watch list of even athletic directors. They're in this for coaches, but giving my own username to be able to look up some stats. So if you hear me talk about athletic director contracts, it will be from AD Vantage, and I will credit them for that. If it's something that's not from them, I will make that I will make that claim as well. So that said, I put the names together. I don't have sources. I don't do anything like this. I look at these searches from the perspective of the institution. Okay, this isn't your fan list that a local journalist will put out with names that make no sense of why, oh, an AD used to work here 20 years ago. Now he's the AD at another SEC school. Maybe we'll get him. Those things are not going to happen. And so this is all from the perspective of reality. And I have no insights from search firms or the schools. I just think what I think and share it with all of you. With that said, today I'm going to look at the Toledo, the Kentucky, the Oregon State, and the Wisconsin. These are just going to be my short list of names that I think have the opportunity to be interviewed or possibly get the job. Now, obviously, we don't know a lot of external professional sports. It's a little harder to do that research. I'll have some of those names, but this is just what I'm going to do. So before I do that, let's look at what jobs are actually open at the time that we are recording this video, which is Wednesday, April 15th. And higheredathletics.com, I have a D180 hiring tracker that happily will pull up, and let's go through what is open and what's not open. So right now we have 20 D1AD jobs open, 2 power school jobs in Kentucky and Wisconsin, 4 other non-power FBS jobs, Old Dominion, Toledo, Oregon State, and South Alabama, 7 in the FCS, South Carolina State, Southern Utah, Texas Southern, Wagner College, Northern Arizona, Duquesne, North Carolina A&T, and then 7 non-football D1 schools, leading off with St. Joseph's, New Orleans, CSU Bakersfield, CSU Fullerton, San Francisco, which I made it clear I think the interim it's just a matter of time, Northern Kentucky and Wright State, the 2 newest of that kind of group of schools from the Horizon League, with 2 female ADs leaving their posts. That there are not a lot of female D1 ADs right now, and McNeese State, promoted within their deputy AD, Bridget Martin at McNeese as another female AD. But let's get into this search. So let's start with Toledo. Parker is doing this search, and I've got some names. The D1 ticker reporting, don't know what the source was, I should check that real quick, that these interviews are moving quick, like talking about this week doing the first rounds of remote interviews. The report is actually from College AD, which I read it in the ticker yesterday. Set to begin virtual interviews with AD candidates on Tuesday, which reports the, quote, process is expected to move quickly. First, it's our understanding that the virtual interview portion of the search will take place on Tuesday and Wednesday. From there, sources say the field is expected to be condensed to finalists. Sources say finalists are then expected to meet next week in Detroit for in-person interviews. So my list is, who knows, if you're interviewing, by the time this comes out, you would have probably already finished your interviews, whether it was Tuesday or Wednesday. So like I said, it's moving quick. Parker's running this search. I found it interesting that Brian Lutz was named the interim, and What I thought would happen is I thought that Nicole Harris, the Deputy AD, COO, and SWA, I thought she would, be the interim. That's usually what we see is like the COO. And I also thought Connor Whalen would have a chance as, kind of being the internal permanent AD. I think he fits this trend of young ADs, and he's got a doctorate. He's got everything that you would want the faculty. Is he young? Yes. He hasn't been there that long, but he's a MAC athlete too, a former MAC athlete. And I just thought that this would be kind of an interesting opportunity. I don't think that that's the search process that they're going to do, partially because of them using Brian Lutz. You could say, well, maybe that's so that Connor and Nicole could both apply for it. But since it's moving so quick, it just makes me feel like they might both be either going to Syracuse or not in contention for the AD search. So we'll see what happens there. I had some names that I think would be really interesting. I think this could be an opportunity for a Haven Fields, who obviously is the Nebraska Deputy AD and COO. He has MAC ties from being the Deputy AD for Jeff Mitchell at Ball State and Beth Getz when she was the AD there. And he's he grew up with the fundraising earlier in his background. Now he's gotten some high-level things between his short tenure at Washington and then also what he's been doing for the last 2 years at Nebraska. Other name that I thought might be interesting is Anthony DeFino, the Deputy AD and Chief Revenue Officer at Cincinnati. He's a Syracuse and Fordham person, so Syracuse was his hometown. Fordham is where he went to school. Kind of that colder, more weather environment. He's in Ohio right now. I just think that everything that they've done creative-wise at Cincinnati, he's been a very heavy player in that. Been there 5 years almost, I believe. And so I think that this could be his opportunity to be a D1 AD at an FBS school, which is what I think they might ultimately do. My wild card is someone that has never left their state to work, but Jalen Dominguez. And the reason I say that is he was in the running, from what I understand, at New Mexico. And he's still at New Mexico, but obviously Ryan Berryman got that job. Well, he was an alum from New Mexico State as well. He didn't get that job. Joe Fields got that job. But at the same time, the president, Toledo, has not been there that long, but the president is actually the former provost at New Mexico. That's where he came from. And I think people focus mostly on his Michigan career because I think he was there for 2 or 3 decades as a faculty, but he comes straight from New Mexico for I think 7 or 8 years. And so is that connection, the fact that New Mexico also, that search was handled by Parker. And so with Parker doing the Toledo search, if he's a revenue generator, he's a fundraiser, he is a young AD, but so are they looking at that? I'm not entirely sure, but that would be my kind of wild card pick is Jalen Dominguez. I don't think he actually will leave New Mexico right now, but if you look at the ages of the ADs at New Mexico and New Mexico State, anytime he gets a chance now, if he wants to be an AD and he thinks he's ready, he might be taking it with this trend. So that would be interesting as well, kind of as my wild card pick. And then who I think is another person that would be probably someone that I repeat too often with some of these openings is I really just have this feeling that Leon Costello, Montana State AD, would be a great hire at an FBS school. And I think he has done incredible things at Montana State. The tenure there is strong, but after a certain amount of time, do you want to look for new opportunities? And if you've been in FCS, if you naturally want to then go to an FBS position, that would be one of the things. So I look at it as this: if I'm, Toledo and I'm on the committee and I'm looking at, give me 3 names, I am trying to see if Leon Costello, Havenfield Sr., or Anthony DeFino are interested in becoming the Toledo athletic director. So that is what I'm looking at with the Rockets. Let's go to Kentucky as I flip my very old school notebook that I write everything down and it hardly ever leaves the office. Kentucky, there is no search firm yet, and I don't actually know if there will be. It seems like the president, who's been there, I think, since 2011, will probably be okay with just doing this himself with leaning on his university stakeholders and people he trusts. And I know Mitch Barnhart is going to say the right things, that he'll help if he's asked, but he's not handpicking the next athletic director. Well, it would be bad business, I think, to not hire or not ask Mitch Barnhart to help with this. So I have a feeling that the president will lean on him heavily to kind of educate him and give his opinion, similar to what we're seeing. Like, I don't think the Oklahoma is probably the same, but that'll be something I'd be looking for. Is I think Mitch Barnhart has to kind of doesn't have to approve, but I think the president's going to very much ask for his opinion, and I think Mitch will give it because he loves the place and he wants to see the future. So I've got some names for this position, but I do feel like I saw Mark Hill is an internal candidate. The list for this job, I think, was just not well put together of like what some people had put out there. And mine, I'm not saying mine's any better, but like Mark Hill, if he was going to be the next AD at Kentucky or anyone internal, why would you drag out this process? And especially if Mitch is going to stay and you weren't going to do a real search, then I think it would have been more like a North Carolina thing where you give him like a longer runway and Bubba's going to stay throughout his contract. And then you just go ahead and have this transition period. That leads me to think that this is going to be an external person. And some of these schools, like a Kentucky, with the trends that are going on in college athletics, some of these power schools, if you look across the staff directories, they're not necessarily ripe with people that you think are going to lead this new phase of college athletics. And it's okay that people don't leave because they love the schools. But like whenever you have someone like Mitch Barnhart, who's kind of a legend in this AD role, and he leaves, you're probably just going to, if you didn't already have a succession plan, then you're just going to start fresh and look for something. And so I think that the time is right to get someone new. And so I've got 4 names that I feel confident about if, once again, you can't factor in, I don't have sources about this, but also you can't factor in someone's personal life of what they want to do. Okay, I don't ask people. Sometimes I might, if I talk to someone already on the podcast or something or in private, I'll say, are you going to be offended if I mention you? But I don't get sources or anything like that. So I've got 4 names, and just in the order of alphabetical order, I will go with them. Jared Benko, he is the former Georgia Southern AD, and he's been at Auburn as the executive deputy AD for quite some time now. I think people forget that before he went to Georgia Southern as the AD, he had like a decade of experience at multiple SEC schools. I believe he went to an SEC school for undergrad. I just think that, for one, I do think that you're going to have to be a previous AD for this job. So let me just say that kind of removes some of the anticipation of the next names. But Jared Benko is someone that I'm high on as a future leader in the SEC. Clearly is an SEC area of the country that is not going to go anywhere else, having been in Georgia and the places he's been. Don't be surprised if he is a front runner for this. I think he would be great at that job. I think he totally understands it. I think he's innovative. He's sat in the chair before, so that would remove all doubt of his preparation. The next person, I got to remember what alphabetical order it is, goodness. Julie Cromer. So I just hope that Julie wants to be an AD again, and that the LSU, the departure from Ohio to LSU was to get a P4 AD job. I know Ohio University was struggling with some finances as an institution and maybe felt some limits there in the MAC, but she has strong SEC ties and Big Ten ties from being at places like Arkansas and IU. And LSU is a very different job right now than what it was when she left Ohio, because Scott Woodward hired her. And Scott Woodward was the AD at the time. And now obviously things have changed. There's been not a circus, but there's just been a lot of changes at LSU with personalities of their coaches. So maybe she's happy there, maybe she's not. I don't know, but it would be to ask and reach out, I think, would be what Kentucky would be smart to do, because I do think she could handle this. She's been on the forefront of a lot of the changes in college athletics from the governance side, and I think the president would really respect that. And maybe also, even more importantly, I think Mitch Barnhart would respect a Julie Cromer hire and think highly of that too. So we'll see if that goes anywhere, but I just feel like her leadership could be strong and steady, and that she would not be stuck in the past, and she would be looking to the future. The next one is Jeremiah Dickey, Boise State Athletic Director. And the reason I say this is I do think that he's been at places like Baylor, Houston. He will be a P4 AD. I mean, Boise State cannot keep him forever, even if he is super happy there. Maybe he stays long enough for to see through this Pac-12 and everything. But I look at one theme of when I look at things is, I'm not going to give away everything I look at, but one key theme is the presidency at the institution. So the president that hired and extended Jeremiah is no longer there. She left for another presidency. And then the interim president that's been in the role for a while is not going to be the Boise State permanent president. So that person is now just got announced as the Montana president. And so that is another interesting dynamic. And because even though he has several years left on his contract, I believe, as I go to my AD Vantage portal. So Jeremiah still has until June of 2029 under contract. However, you would think that would make the buyout incredibly difficult for Kentucky to absorb, but it doesn't. And so there's a clause in his contract that allows, with the president that hired and extended him that left, that allows his buyout to just be a one-time, or maybe not one-time, sure, I don't know about installments, but usually sometimes these buyouts are for a number for each year. Well, his is just $250,000 for any time he leaves, and that opens the door for, if you are a P4 school and you're looking for a proven AD. Well, a lot of these ADs have incredible buyouts that you just can't imagine paying for your AD because they're not a football or basketball coach. Well, Jeremiah, you can get a great athletic director that has been incredibly innovative for what he's been at, where he's been at, and he's been at some big places, that I do think that at some point when he's ready, he will. I obviously predicted him as finalist for the Syracuse job. I don't know if he was, but that buyout thing is gonna open the question and open the door for some of these big jobs. So that is someone that I think would be highly sought after if you're Kentucky and you're smart about that. Then Brian White, Florida Atlantic Athletic Director. At what point does Boca Raton not be fun anymore? Maybe never, because it's a beautiful place. At the same time, has Missouri ties. I think he probably wants to at some point be a P4 AD. Maybe he doesn't. But look, he's had success at FAU. He's had success at other places. Is it time for him to go to an SEC school like a Kentucky? His name obviously carries weight. His dad, Kevin White, and his brother being there just down the road from Kentucky at Tennessee. Is this the opportunity where he goes back into there? I think his name would be an interesting one to look at. Are you willing to pay a buyout? Because he does have a bigger buyout. His contract actually goes through June of 2029 as well. And his buyout deal, according to AD Vantage, if he's hired at this point in time of this search, would still be north of $600,000. And so that would be probably a difficult one, but if you find that as your athletic director, that's a name I think you have to have on there. And then I don't think he would leave right now, but I will throw one name out that I wish he wanted to be an AD at a place like Kentucky that I think would be really good, and that is Stephen Harper, the deputy AD at IU. Look, he's an Indiana native. He has been the number 2 at IU for quite some time now under Scott Dolson. He's just a great person, a great leader. He was he was the overseeing of our department whenever I was there, and I keep in touch with him. And I don't think he would leave. But if I had to throw out one name, if anything, just to show the credit that I think that he's that he deserves, it would be Stephen Harper from IU. And but like I said, I don't think he will go with that. So I do think the most likely names here: Jared Benko, Jeremiah Dickey, and Julie Cromer. I think Brian White would be if you really wanted him and you saw this as like his last stop. Then you might be willing to pay that buyout. The benefit you get with Jeremiah is obviously a small buyout, and I know we're talking about Kentucky, but at the same time, we're being fiscally responsible. Jared Benko and Julie Cromer, they're not sitting ADs right now. They've been ADs, but you don't have to worry about this long contract buyout for that part as well. Let's go to Oregon State. Oregon State is kind of a fresh one that I put some names together of who I think it could be, who I think some people might think it might be, but why I don't think it will be them. And it has nothing to do with them as a person, but more about the situation. So for example, one of the best ADs in the country, I believe, is Dan Bartholomew from Western Michigan. I visited him recently, and I just think he has too big of a buyout because he signed a contract extension not that long ago. Obviously has some ties to Oregon State. I don't know that he would even want to leave. He seems very happy at Western Michigan from when I visited him. But at the same time, I think that some people are going to put him in there. But look, his contract goes through 2031, and the buyout is so large. It's basically the whole contract. So I'm not even going to mention the number. I'll just say that it's way more than anything else that I'll mention. So I think he's a great AD at Western Michigan. I think if he wants to be, will be an AD at a larger school. Now, look, you could say, is Oregon State a better job than Western? I don't know that it is. I think it would just be if you really like the place. He had been a deputy AD there. And so I think he'll be a P4 AD as well. And I think what could happen is, do you make that jump from MAC to P4? I don't know. You might have to go somewhere as a deputy first or a higher level, but I don't know that Oregon State will be that. I only mention his name out of respect because I think he's a great AD and that some people are going to match him to an Oregon State, but I do not think that's going to happen. However, I do think Leon Costello, broken record, I know, because I'd already mentioned him, possibly for Toledo. I think you can't overlook, or you can't speak enough, Montana and Oregon, not incredibly far apart. It's a jump up from the FCS. It is a proven AD that can kind of go in there and right the ship of anything that Oregon State's been dealing with. Will it win you the press conference? I don't know. Probably not, because I think some people, when they talk about their own school and they think about the old Pac-12 maybe, that they're going to want a high name or a popular name. Leon Costello will be an incredible AD there, in my opinion. And if that happens, for the same reasons I mentioned in Toledo, I do think if you've been to a place 9 or 10 years and you might want a new challenge, and Oregon State might be that challenge. So if I'm Oregon State leadership, I'm looking at Leon Costello for sure. I think there's some other names that are going to be mentioned. Kimya Massey at San Diego, been the AD for about 2 years. Spent 9 years at Oregon State, 2 as a deputy AD and COO. I just don't see, the previous background was mostly in academics, and that's not a slight because I know that's important. That's my background, and I do think he's doing, I'm sure he's doing really good work at San Diego, but I don't think that now would be the time to leave after only 2 years. And with that background, I don't know that that is necessarily the direction that Oregon State's going to be looking for right now. One name that I don't think will be out there, but there are some slight Oregon State ties, is Mike Ketchum, the Executive Deputy AD of Revenue Generation at UNLV. The reason I mention this is he did spend 5 years in the 90s and early 2000s as a coach for golf at Oregon State, as the head men's golf coach. But I'm more looking about his career between UNLV and Arizona and what he's been doing. So he came to UNLV in 2022, the start of 2022. He's been the deputy AD for near 2 years now, and then he came there from Arizona, where he's the senior associate AD for administration and men's basketball. And I do wonder, he's in I think he could justify like this move. Been at schools on the West Coast with Arizona and obviously in Nevada, and then maybe going back to Oregon to Corvallis would be certainly a name to consider if he would want to do that, and if he has aspirations to be an AD. I think he has a little bit of a different background, but it's something that I do think that even a slightest tie of those two things would be make it worth note. There's two names that I think this comes down to. Three, if you throw in Leon Costello, I do think he has a really good chance. But the other two that I think are the more likely names would be Valerie Johnson, the deputy AD at Oregon. She's been there since January 2023. She has strong Oregon ties. You'll remember her as the Portland State AD for 5 years. Then she took a little brief away from the AD chair before she went back to Oregon, and a couple years later. But she stayed in Oregon at that time. She still stayed in Portland area. And then Williamette, she was the AD there, which is in Salem, Oregon, for 2 years earlier in her career. So she's mostly stayed in Oregon pretty much her whole career. And if she's at Oregon now, obviously Rob Mullins isn't going to leave. She's been at Portland State. Does she look at where Oregon State's positioned right now that maybe she would be a strong hire? You have a female president at Oregon State. Maybe she's looking to maybe make a female AD hire if there is one of a candidate that she likes. Strong Oregon ties, I think, is the huge component here, and she's been able to lead a program before, and so I think this would be an interesting time for her to kind of re-enter that chair. And you assume, based on getting back into it at Oregon, that maybe she's still open to another AD chair at some point. So that would be one name I would look at. The other one is Dusty Clements, Executive Deputy AD and COO at University of Minnesota. He's been there since 2017. He's a Wyoming native. He's also has a Boise State background. That side of the country, maybe if you're wanting to be the AD now, maybe you go back out west to Oregon. So those would be some names that I would be curious about. Now, would it be a pay cut from being a Big Ten deputy? I don't know. Most likely, yes. But would he want to be the AD? He's not going to be necessarily the AD for replacing Mark Coyle right now. So I think Dusty Clements, Valerie Johnson, or once again Leon Costello would be names to keep an eye on. And then the wild card pick, I think, would be a Mike Ketchum from UNLV. So this Wisconsin search is going to be quite entertaining to see what direction they go. I saw people kind of applauding Chris McIntosh for leaving and going to the Big Ten. And, McIntosh was a Wisconsin person. He had worked under Barry Alvarez. You're never going to make anyone happy, but there's always going to be some opinions here. So names I mentioned, I know not everyone will agree with. So I've got a few. Let me first address with Marcus Sedbury. He definitely doesn't fit the trend of AD hires at P4 schools with his background. He's not a Wisconsin person. He is very much tied to this football hire and this football program, in my opinion. He was high level at Baylor as well, but he hasn't had that kind of creative revenue and fundraising background or just the external. So can he do that? Will he be a really good interim? Yes, I think he will. I think he'll be an AD. I don't know that what Wisconsin needs right now that's what they're going to do. But Marcus, this is one where he was the COO, so I think it naturally makes sense to make him the interim and see how things go. So I'm going to mention another name that I've already mentioned, Jeremiah Dickey, for the same reasons. Yes, he's under contract until June of 2029. President uncertainty and vacancy, really even the interim. They're now going to have another interim president. It makes the buyout only $250,000, even though he's under contract for 3 more years. He's going to be a Power 4 AD. He's really good at what he does. He's very good at engaging fan bases. He seems like a great leader of his staff. He has had football success and in hiring and knowing what they needed at the time. Can he come in and kind of right the ship for Wisconsin football if a change is necessary, or just being creative and getting the resources that maybe Wisconsin football needs? I think he is high on that list of who Wisconsin has to consider. The other one is John Cunningham. Now, his buyout is pricey. So before June of this year, or before July 1, it would be $3.2 million, which is astronomical for an AD hire, you would think. But after that, after July 1, it drops down to $1.6 million. And so if he's the AD that you want, now here's why you might consider doing that. So he was at Cincinnati when Luke Fickell was there. Could he help kind of that relationship reset the football program in the direction? Can it improve things? But also look at Cincinnati as they entered the Big 12. John had a huge role in all the success they've had. He's very much out there. He's got previous Big 10 ties, being the deputy AD at Minnesota. So it would not surprise me if John Cunningham is mentioned there. He's been at Cincinnati for over 5 years now, and does he want a mission and a project of this new kind of rebuild of college athletics and getting Wisconsin, back there as a winner? He's got a very capable staff behind him at Cincinnati that someone could probably just be an internal promotion if he did leave, and he could also probably bring some of them with him to Wisconsin if he needed to do that. So those two names are kind of these traditional names that I think if you wanted a sitting AD that you could look at. The other one would be Sean Frazier. So Sean has been a steady leader at Northern Illinois. He's communicative. I think he's really good at that. He's relatable. He's also adaptable. So he's clearly one of these more traditional ADs without the looking backward thing. Like, he is always going to look forward. He's going to be creative. And one of my favorite guests I've had on the podcast of late is he's a smart guy. He knows what he's doing. It would be a big jump from a Northern Illinois to Wisconsin, but he is a Wisconsin person with a Wisconsin degree. So Sean was at Wisconsin as a deputy AD. He had for a couple of years, but he had been there for 6 years in elevating roles. So he would be an interesting name, I think, if you wanted a sitting AD that. But I don't know that jump from Northern Illinois to Wisconsin is what they're looking for as a Big Ten school. Would definitely be good at it. It's just I put myself in the eyes and the brain of who I think is running the show, which another thing is Wisconsin is hampered by the fact that their chancellor just left to be the president of Columbia. And so with her leaving, and then the system president also just left, and so Wisconsin is kind of at a leadership point where that's why I think Marcus Sedbury will probably be in this job for a little bit, but the board president is going to be incredibly important, and so is the interim chancellor to help lead this. So I haven't heard anything about a search firm or anything yet, but that would be another kind of wrinkle in this whole thing. Now, talking about if you want a Wisconsin person that's already internal, I don't think it's Marcus Sedbury, but with the direction of Mitchell Pinta, I would find that interesting if he would be ready for this job or if it'd be too quick for them to make him the AD. But he's the Chief Revenue Officer, Deputy AD, and 10 plus years NFL experience on the external side. So no head coach hire experience, obviously, but you also, if the football head coach doesn't work out this season, you can't pin that to him. He wasn't the one that made that hire and that final decision. So as we get more of an external focus, I do think that his name has to be mentioned. If not, you get someone else, then hopefully he stays because he obviously cares about Wisconsin being an alum. But that's been very important for the recent ADs at Wisconsin were alums and AD people. So Barry Alvarez was a longtime coach and administrator there. And then you had Chris McIntosh as the AD and an alum and a football player there. So would Mitchell Pinta be an option? I think he's going to be capable of being an AD. And if he's not selected, then hopefully he is still happy there and stays. But he fits the trend of what we see some of these schools going. But it's not a trend that we've seen at necessarily a Big Ten school. The one other name I had for this is really my wild card that you will not see a list of, that I had to do quite a bit of digging about, is Ricky Sandler, the founder and CEO of Eminence Capital, so a global asset management and investment company. very much involved as a donor, as even like a teacher and mentor for the business school at Wisconsin. I read a couple articles that the university had done on him and his wife, who's also an alum of Wisconsin-Madison. He's an accounting and finance alum for the School of Business, but just clear passion of the student, not just student athletes, but like the student success of the campus. And what we have seen a trend is schools are looking at people that have close ties to their university. And we're looking at this, we talked about this investment coming to college athletics and all these things. Well, what if you have an alum that cares deeply about your institution and has proven that over a long period of time, that has gone on to run and found an investment company? You want that, like that knowledge, that thinking, and that love for Wisconsin. So would Ricky Sandler, give that up or put that on hold to go serve his university at a time of need whenever we have so much uncertainty around the future direction of college athletics at this level? I think it's very possible that you see Ricky Sandler as a name that appears to possibly be the wild card athletic director of Wisconsin. And I feel like it is most likely Ricky Sandler or someone like him, or it's a Jeremiah Dickey. I think John Cunningham would be a huge buyout. I think Mitchell Pinto would be maybe seen as too soon, but I think he's very capable, and I think he has the right background. I think Sean Frazier, it probably just, if this type of hire would have happened, I think it would have already happened by now. And then Marcus Sedberry, I think he's a really good administrator, but I think him being so closely tied to the football decisions in the football program, and his background is not really coming up in even the traditional or the new approach of athletic directors, is going to hinder his chance of becoming the Wisconsin athletic director. So I think that's what you see is really, I think it comes down to Ricky Sandler or Jeremiah Dickey for Wisconsin. So look, I don't mean to offend anyone with this type of stuff. I don't know how long I'll be doing these insight videos, but people seem to find them helpful. I do know that I'm going to do another video on the other AD openings and do an update, especially looking into the St. Joseph's one, the Old Dominion, the South Alabama. So there's other ones. There'll probably be more coming up. I have a list of contracts that aren't being renewed yet, or they haven't. I have some projected retirements. So I think I have my hand on the pulse of what other AD jobs are going to open up. But I just wanted to really go deep into those four: Toledo, Kentucky, Oregon State, and Wisconsin. Could I be wrong on all of them? Yes, I definitely could be. But people seem to like to look at these insights, and I like to share them as I try to break into executive search and keep being a resource for you as aspirational athletic directors. Until then, keep watching and listening to Higher Ed Athletics. Thanks for the support, and share it with an industry colleague if you do anything out of this episode. And also, thank you to AD Vantage, where victory is vetted, where Tanner Stump and his team, they're doing great things. I appreciate the access to their information. And if you're an aspirational AD or an AD, or you're a deputy and you're making coaching decisions, you really need to be considering AD Vantage. Reach out to me if that's easier. I'll connect you to Tanner, and we'll go from there. So thanks again for watching Higher Ed Athletics.